Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a period of history that is, honestly, almost universally misunderstood. We're going to completely challenge that traditional story of the fall of the ancient world. Because as you'll see, history is rarely as simple as a sudden collapse, and this era proves that beautifully. So think about it. Did the Roman Empire really just collapse into the Dark Ages? For generations, that was literally the accepted narrative. We were all taught that classical civilization peaked, crumbled under the weight of barbarian invasions, and just vanished into a void of darkness and ignorance. But when you actually look at the historical data, that super dramatic narrative of complete and utter ruin, it just doesn't hold up. Okay, let's dive into this and break it down. First, we'll tackle the myth of the fall. Then we're redrawing the imperial map. After that, we'll look at a religious revolution, how they were redefining daily life, and wrap up with a new world order. So, Part 1. The Myth of the Fall. For a really long time, the 18th century historian Edward Gibbon totally dominated the conversation with his decline and fall model. He treated this era strictly as a time of cultural decay. Gibbon was, well, a bit of a pessimist. But modern historians, championed by Peter Brown, view this very differently. They see a transformation. It wasn't a sudden death, it was an incredibly vibrant evolution. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that word transformation. We now call this era late antiquity. It spans from the late 3rd to the 8th century CE, covering a massive chunk of the map across Eurasia, the Mediterranean, and the Near East. Now sure, the Roman imperial government in the West did eventually disappear, and cities absolutely took a hit from war and plague. But classical education, Roman law, and those ancient institutions, they didn't just end. They morphed. They took on new forms and were remade into a totally new, multicultural, multipolar world. Just to anchor ourselves, let's quickly look at how this played out. It kicks off in the 3rd century with some severe imperial crises. We're talking hyperinflation and civil wars, which forced guys like Diocletian and Constantine into a massive reorganization. Then we hit the famous year 476, when the last Western Roman emperor was deposed. But hey, the story keeps going. The 6th century brings the ambitious reign of the Eastern Emperor Justinian, and then the 7th century hits us with the dramatic Arab conquests that essentially reshaped the map entirely. Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds, redrawing the imperial map. You see, the world didn't just empty out, it became multipolar. On one hand, you've got the Western provinces transitioning into post-Roman Germanic kingdoms. Think the Goths, Vandals, and Franks. And contrary to popular belief, they didn't just destroy Rome. They actually used Roman land, taxation, and laws to govern. Meanwhile, right in the middle, you have the Eastern Roman Empire, which remained incredibly resilient, ruling from its super-fortified capital in Constantinople. And over in the east, the Sasanian Empire. This was the other great superpower, ruling over Iran and Mesopotamia, and they stood as a formidable, persistent rival to Rome for centuries. To truly grasp the scale and resilience of that Eastern Roman Empire, consider this staggering number: 10. By the 6th century, Constantinople's population was 10 times larger than the old city of Rome. 10 times! While the West was decentralizing, the East was doubling down on centralization. Constantinople had massive walls, a wealthy court, and a really powerful bureaucracy that allowed it to survive shocks that would have easily crushed a lesser state. Next up, Section 3, a religious revolution. This era is absolutely huge because it gave birth to lasting institutionalized religions. First, you have the rapid Christianization of the Roman Empire, heavily backed by the state after Constantine. At the same time, Rabbinic Judaism was really taking institutional form, with major academies in Palestine and Babylonia churning out foundational texts like the Talmud. Over in the Sasanian Empire, Zoroastrianism became deeply tied to imperial leadership and court ceremony. And finally, in the 7th century, Islam emerges in the Arabian Peninsula. And the key thing here? These weren't just private beliefs. These religious frameworks fundamentally reshaped local authority, organized poor relief and charity, and forged entirely new international alliances. You know, it's really easy to assume these ancient empires were just uniform, homogeneous blocks. But that's a total myth. Just look closely at the Sasanian Empire. While the ruling class was Zoroastrian, they actually governed an incredibly diverse society. The empire contained thriving populations of Christians, Jews, and Manichaeans. Managing that intense diversity was a core part of their imperial strategy, which just goes to show that late antiquity was deeply complex and remarkably mixed. All right, bringing it down to the ground level. Section 4, redefining daily life. Emperors might fall and borders might shift, but you know what? The bureaucratic gears keep on turning. Because Let's be honest. Absolutely nothing stops taxes. Even in the middle of this supposed ancient apocalypse, the tax collector cometh. The fiscal state was incredibly resilient. Bureaucrats kept records, and large agricultural estates kept functioning. For your average rural villager or urban artisan, life revolved around these highly practical realities: paying rent, signing leases, and negotiating with powerful landlords. None of that vanished just because the name of the kingdom changed. And we actually have incredible windows into this past, like the Oxyrhynchus papyri discovered in Egypt. Dating back to the 6th century, these surviving documents literally show us written contracts, local officials, petitions, and deep, deep networks of dependence. It's an amazing illustration of exactly how far the fiscal state reached into local society. People were definitely not living in some undocumented, chaotic dark age. They were signing leases, filing petitions, and living highly structured, documented economic lives. And that structure extended right to the very laws that governed them. In the 6th century, the Eastern Roman Emperor Justinian sponsored a massive project to collect and codify centuries of Roman law into a single, cohesive framework called the Corpus Juris Civilis. So, why should you care about that today? Well, because the legal and bureaucratic concepts codified right here in late antiquity laid the direct foundational groundwork for many of the civil law systems that we still live under today in the modern world. It's pretty wild to think about. Which brings us to our final chapter, Section 5, A New World Order. This all played out like a massive global domino effect. It starts with an incredibly destructive, decades-long war between the Byzantine and Sasanian empires from 602 to 628. Now, the Byzantines eventually won, but both superpowers were left completely, utterly exhausted. The Sasanian monarchy spiraled into rapid instability, and the Roman fiscal system was severely strained. This created a massive power vacuum, which led directly to the Arab conquests. United by the new Islamic faith, Arab armies swiftly conquered Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and eventually overthrew the entire Sasanian empire, redrawing the map permanently. The result was a definitive geopolitical reset. The old bipolar world, dominated by that long rivalry between Rome and Iran, was officially over. But here is the truly fascinating part. The administrative practices continued. The Arab conquests did not erase the institutions of late antiquity overnight. Instead, the core elements we've been talking about, urban administration, taxation systems, long-distance trade, scriptural monotheism, they simply adapted to new leadership. The infrastructure of the ancient world survived. It just changed management. So, that leaves us with this final provocative thought. Did classical antiquity ever truly end, or did it just evolve into the world we know today? When you look closely at the surviving taxes, the laws, the religions, and those incredibly resilient institutions of late antiquity, it becomes pretty clear that history is just a continuous chain of transformation. The ancient world didn't fall into darkness, it evolved to build the very foundations of our modern era. I really hope this explainer has changed the way you view this fascinating period of history, and I hope it leaves you eager to learn more. Thanks for joining me.